Welcome everyone, this is Danny and Karl with Get Wisdom, and today we're going to continue with our channeling series. And today Karl is going to channel Edgar Cayce, who in some ways might be considered a kindred spirit, but he was called the sleeping prophet. And so there's a marked difference right there between what Karl does and what Edgar Cayce did. It's kind of hard to believe that he's been gone for so long. He died in January of 1945. And that was a pretty rough time in American history because World War II was still going on. And he was a very controversial figure. He came from the South. He ended up in Virginia Beach. And he still, to this day, has a huge following. Many, many books written about this fellow. So we have 7 questions for him today and probably a bit to discuss before we start. So thank you, Karl, for doing this with us today. And let's go ahead and see what we can talk about before we start the channeling.
Okay, well, maybe I should tell you what I know about Cayce, at least in a general way, which is relatively little. I have read some of his material. I have a number of books about him and those days and the various types of things that he did. I confess that some of it I felt really rang true for me and I liked very much. And other things that he would bring forth, I was kind of underwhelmed by. Some of it is very general and vague. And I understand why that can be, too. There are often things asked of channelers that are vague and non-specific. And by people who have very little depth of understanding. And there's a problem in rewarding such individuals with new leaps in understanding and insight and awareness. And it's hard for people to understand or maybe even accept this at the outset. You think if you go to an authority, they're going to hold forth. And as long as you're willing to listen, they'll bend your ear and they'll just pour out all kinds of things. And it doesn't work that way at all. You're likely to get a very vague, non-specific description or answer to anything you are eliciting unless you've done a fair amount of homework and put some investment in learning what it is you're probing into. And it of course, immediately raises the skeptics, critical hackles. Well, if you go and steep yourself in all the knowledge, that just means you're going to spit that back out in some clever way, and it'd be better to have someone completely naive, knowing nothing about a subject, and that would really be impressive, right? If they could come forth with details and scientific terminology even, or what have you, that no one's ever known or heard about. I've had those things happen, and I often have things said through me I had no knowledge about. And in fact, for years, most of what I have done is ask questions for which I do not know the answer. So I can assure you that it isn't me that I talk to when I do my channeling. But beyond that, there is no way to be absolutely certain who one's talking to and why the information is coming forth as it does. But in the process, I've learned a lot about the ins and outs. And what the channeler knows and doesn't know can be a factor. And if asking questions on behalf of someone else, that creates a further complication because now you have 2 differing knowledge bases, you have differing intentions and level of intention going on. The channeler may not be as absorbed or caring about what the information is desired here. They're working on behalf of someone else, and they're, likely to be conscientious and, caring up to a point of satisfying them. But they don't have as big a stake as maybe the person coming, wanting desperately to know something. So things can get lost along the way. There's many opportunities for error. And for limits on the information. That's the biggest thing. You'd think if you get a crack in the door, that's all you need. And then you can learn anything, anytime, anywhere. And it really doesn't work that way. So I've had to go back to the well again and again and again and re-ask similar things to probe further. Take what I know now, go back, and think about that next logical leap of understanding and spend time pondering it and come up with an idea, a speculation, if you will. And I'll go and ask about my speculation, and then I'll learn something about it then. And that wasn't told to me at the outset. Now I'm 2, 3, 4, 10 steps further down the line in my level of understanding. But I had to do some work along the way.
One interesting similarity between Edgar Cayce and your work is the healing aspect, because so much of his readings were about people with medical conditions or something like that, and he would come up with these recipes and regimens and different formula and compounds to take and how to take them and when to take them, and but the healing emphasis was interesting to me, and I often thought that was one of the reasons he was so productive and so prolific, is because the divine realm, perhaps in his case, was very, very interested in helping him because he was helping other people. That's what he was using his talents for.
I suspect so. Yes, I suspect so, very much. And the divine realm will work to help you with the tools you understand and feel comfortable with. They're not going to throw something in out of left field. They're not going to tell you to go look up Thomas Edison because he's working on some electrical thing that could be reconfigured, and suddenly there's a new patent idea there and a new type of technology. They will not do that. It's up to humans to innovate and come up with local science and technologies that humans can conceive of and design their own tools and so forth. But there can be extrapolations made to conventional wisdom and even folk medicine and so forth, because there are medicinal substances in nature, and it is part of Creator's plan. So they can take that information and make a recommendation that's doable and has a certain logic, and I think that's really what was going on, that interplay.
Yeah.
It wasn't a refined metaphysical healing solution for the most part. And, I confess I've not looked at volumes and volumes of his material along those lines, but those things talking about healing were very much as you described that I saw.
Yeah.
A nostrum, a kind of a poultice or a regimen with some nutritional product taken in a certain way and for a certain duration and so on.
Yeah.
And those are often useful, and they can be a stopgap. They can be an adjunct to help keep someone going, and even to encourage the hope of recovery can help get them over the hump and allow a divine healing to come in and do its thing. So in conventional medicine today, Western medicine is very, very much like that. It isn't curing things, directly. For the most part, it's supportive. It's symptomatic relief and treatment. Right. And you're hoping natural healing will kick in and take the person the rest of the way. But that can help someone have hope in their recovery. And that's a key to allowing divine healing to work.
Right. Because
if people are pessimistic, the divine cannot heal them.
Right.
In some cases, at least, because they're so certain that this is impossible, and their wishes will be respected.
Yeah, so. And that's something that I want to say too before we start, is that with all the material that's been generated from the work that he did during his life, there's the possibility for questions that are more sophisticated, more piercing, or whatever. they're probably not here, just due to the fact that neither one of us has made this a topic of research, and there may be people in our audience, maybe not soon, but maybe later, who've really studied Edgar Cayce, who is worth study. And so my apologies to those people who are going to see this video and go, dang, he should have asked whatever, and I imagine, it's an order that really can't be filled, because we could probably do 20 of these sessions, all with, questions derived from people who've made a study of him. But I think in our defense, I've gone to the questions that may have the wider appeal, and also having the familiarity of what these people as light beings are most interested in. Because as it turns out, we get a very similar report from all of them about the front burner issues from mankind, rather than satisfying our more peripheral interests. They're kind of going to the heart of the matter in their answers, and this comes up time and time again. We may ask about something, and within that answer that we get, it's turned back to, well, what are the front burners for humankind, and what does the divine realm want to let us know about? And that's usually what we hear about, irrespective of the question. So that's something that I'm very sensitive to and aware of, when I ask these questions, because I know some of the questions we're just not going to get a lot of time spent on, because they're not really germane. They're not really issues that are of concern to the divine realm as it relates to humans.
Well,
that's just the way it is, I think.
You can see this all through human history and the evolution of human culture. There are issues of the day and many fads and cultural interests that come and go.
Right.
So what was a burning issue in the 1800s or the 1700s and so on, to us may seem really kind of strange, because it might be very arcane.
Yeah.
And arising through a level of unawareness of something, and the knowledge wasn't there for people to have a basic understanding about something, and could be something in nature or something about human needs. And so to go back and dissect it might be of interest to historians, but a narrowing and a vanishingly small coterie of would-be experts in the end. And we don't have time to do those sort of things.
Right.
And one of the other problems is it gets complicated in the ins and outs, because there are errors that happen along the way. And then you're chasing things that are real and maybe not, or maybe misunderstood and misperceived, and therefore misrepresented in what comes through. And it looks like an error on its face when it's a mistranslation, right, or a drop in the connection at some point.
And as you were saying before, the divine realm's not going to step in and say, well, you're wrong about that. Let's, a lot of times, if there's something that we believe, we're not necessarily going to get corrected about our belief by the divine realm. They'll try to address the answer to the questions as best they can, but they're not going to go in there and try to, manipulate us. I'm always trying to figure out what the free will box is. There's so many issues driven by the idea of free will and the divine realm's unwillingness to violate those free will principles. And it kind of goes, from our perspective, sometimes it kind of goes to ridiculous extremes, but there's a reason for that. It has to be, this is our game, like you say, this is, or like we've said, or like we've been told, we're in the driver's seat here. So what does that mean? Well, it means a lot, apparently, because the free will is not violated, very rarely violated in any fashion.
Yeah, it's central, and it gets people into trouble all the time, because there is a lack of precision and errors that creep in that may be discovered later and raise questions. And people are quick to throw the baby out with the bath when someone spots an error in somebody's work and makes a sweeping conclusion then that this is all hokum and it's invalid and maybe a scam or maybe just self-delusion or what have you. And it's wrong to jump to that kind of conclusion. And I think the fact he is held up for quite a long period now and was so famous at the time was because he did many things that were right and many things that were in alignment. This is my assumption going in. And that is what creates an aura of acceptance and a legacy and a continued appreciation that just lasts and lasts and lasts. Yeah. Because it's the divine way of keeping the reality of that possibility alive. And this, yes, there are special people who can go beyond the veil.
And this goes back to healing again, because one of the reasons that he established so much credibility so quickly was because of all the people he helped who had serious medical problems. People with eyesight that was failing, and all these conditions, and time after time, whatever he was helping them with worked, and so the word spread that what he was doing was effective. He wasn't. The kind of scrutiny that was put upon him is if he was a charlatan, I think it would have been, it would have come out, and it would have ended his career while he was alive, and that didn't happen. In fact, over his lifetime, the whole system of whatever he was doing kept growing until finally you've got the research center in Virginia Beach. It's a huge facility with all of his work cataloged and, a huge membership and, one of the biggest metaphysical libraries in the world, located right there thanks to his work.
Well, it was an interesting legacy, but that's kind of the hallmark of validity, if you will. Mm-hmm. It's not that someone cannot be a false prophet and get a following and be revered and so on, but they're not as likely to have their teachings persist and to really make a huge impression on people. They may be intriguing and accepted on face value, but it's not the same as being touched by the divine and having those inner stirrings, and especially among people who do have a connection to their spiritual core. It creates a special knowing about that individual and a belief, just in general, that there's goodness here and there's something of value here. And so that's the way I would see it. And one of the things that biases me very heavily in favor of him having done a body of authentic work is his very deep religious conviction and his faith, because I know that is the way to safety in doing this sort of enterprise. Mm-hmm. It's not a guarantee in and of itself. Right. You have to take certain steps and go about your work in certain ways. So religious people can be misled and be horribly corrupted, and it's hard to maintain an uncorrupted state for any length of time. So I think that helped him, at least, that he was coming in with that focus, that he was a devout believer, very, very strong faith and belief. Yeah. And people today lack that all too often. And this is true of the whole New Age community. So all the channelers who are kind of more secular than really spiritual, other than wanting spirituality. They yearn for it. They want that connection. They want enlightenment. But they're not dealing with the Almighty. They don't really think about it in that way. And it's a mistake. It's a grave loss for them, because they're going to be underpowered and they're going to be vulnerable. So
And I think he'll have an opportunity to address that issue in our questions here. We got 7 questions, so maybe we should go ahead and get started.
All right, so we'll see what he has to say. I'm
Yeah.
very, very curious myself. I have deep reverence for anyone who has devoted himself to this kind of undertaking, because I know it's not easy, and it takes quite a huge investment to even get any kind of recognition, any kind of following going. And one has to be very committed and very devoted to the work to maintain the excellence and do enough of the right things to have it be a contribution. And so I'm looking forward to this, and we'll hopefully do right by him. Okay. So I'll take a moment to get in the state of consciousness I need and put safety around the work. I do my channeling through Creator of all that is. And so I ask Creator to connect me with the target. And then he will announce his presence when he's ready.
Okay.
This is Edgar Cayce speaking.
Thank you for joining us. Were you able to transition successfully, and are you currently incarnated as any well-known human?
My transition was uneventful, and this is because of my religious perspective, my alignment with the higher realm, and my expectation of a return home rather than my demise, as so often troubles people and is poor preparation for their eventual departure from the body. We do very much appreciate all of your work, you and your channel, in bringing forth the awareness of this reality for many people. It is a vastly underserved arena and is very much central to progress of humanity to help people bridge this gap, having been impaired during a lifetime of disconnection from the divine and growing distant in their thinking and their awareness of the divine presence within them. They often need a bridge back to the light, and that can be accomplished with direct requests for divine assistance as you teach and as you practice in doing spirit rescue work. Fortunately, this was not needed for me, and it was a blessing that I could have an uneventful return back home. I have not reincarnated since that lifetime, and may well do so in the coming years. But that is in a provisional planning stage and has not been launched as yet. There are many things I would love to be doing, but there is great difficulty as well entering the arena at this point in time, as you very much appreciate. So there is a possibility of doing parallel work with your own, and that we'll see. The problem being, of course, the necessary years to allow maturation to reach a point in time when I could hope to be effective as a thinking and functional adult in order to gain respect of others and have the inner maturity and developmental wisdom to be effective in imparting new information and assisting people with the most critical needs of their life. This is a blessing and an honor to contribute to, and should be done by those who are truly competent and mature enough to understand and handle all that is involved with such an interchange.
Okay, thank you. You claimed 5 human races, white, black, red, brown, and yellow, had been created separately, but simultaneously on different parts of the earth. Knowing what you know now as a light being, can you verify this or give us a better understanding of the origin of the races and the reason for their being separate races of humans?
This is an interesting illustration of the difficulty in accessing information through channeling and being able to understand and interpret the information wisely. In the same way, a channeler seeks an answer to a question based on a gap in their understanding and awareness of the origins of something or its makeup. Once one has an answer in the form of general information, this can inevitably lead to additional awareness of further gaps in understanding, and so on. So it is rarely the case that any channel answer is fully satisfactory in and of itself. It will only be a microcosm of one aspect of the underlying issue in question. This is certainly true of my description of the human races and their origins. It is true that these races developed in varying places. And in a broad sense of the continuity and eternal time scale and the relative short duration of human existence, these races of a differing nature appeared relatively close together. But it was not a single act of creation. I lacked an understanding of the true way in which the races originated, only that they did, and only were associated with events on the earth, not coming from the heavens directly. And this was a clue. This was, in fact, a divine clue, that it was an earthly influence rather than a divine one in the true origins. The differing races of human were not created by your maker, the creator of all that is, who gave birth to the universe and the idea of human and the implementation of the idea in physical reality through the workings of consciousness and its energy, as is true of everything that you witness in the visible universe and the invisible energies as well. Humans were created as a single species. The fact you are still grappling with confusion, doubt, fear, and uncertainty when confronted by members of other races differing from your own shows the wisdom in having a single physical type, a single makeup. If the idea is to have a human family, it is enough variety to have differing genders. There is no need to go beyond that in creating groups of humans with markedly different characteristics that could be misunderstood and then used as not only a point of differentiation, but as a mischaracterization with deeper meaning, to doubt, to cast aspersions, to mistrust, or even fear a differing race as adversary. The fact all of that has happened and more is linked directly to where the differing races of humans actually came from. They were the byproduct of genetic manipulation ongoing of humanity. I was not privy to this in my channeling because the idea did not occur to me. And because I was in the dark, I could not be informed, because this would be leading me along a bold and different and new pathway altogether that would clearly alter my destiny in a major respect. This is not allowed. It is no different with any explorer seeking new territory. We cannot guide the person to the new lands they seek. They must do their homework. They must prepare. They must have a sturdy vessel for travel. They must have a means of tracking their course and charting their progress in reference to something such as heavenly bodies, to know direction vis-a-vis the sun and its arc through the skies, and the various ways in which the calendar is earmarked, and so on, in order to have a chance of understanding their journey to begin with. Prayer can help people to do such feats up to a point, but is rarely powerful enough to allow a major discovery the person has little personal investment in. In my case, this was a glaring gap in awareness that the extraterrestrials have a huge influence on all that takes place in the earth plane. And this manipulation, having gone on for a tremendous length of time, was something beyond my ability to envision. And I could not have conceived of such an influence. Keep in mind that my world and my life was one devoid of any real knowledge or understanding of genetics, let alone the reality it could be influenced by physical beings to change the makeup of a person in direct, visible ways. So there were huge concepts here, not even present within my knowledge. And this is often why the old archives of metaphysical and spiritual and religious lore seem primitive to the modern eye and ear in the retelling. They were privy only to certain things within their scope and capability of understanding them. That has to be because those are the limitations over which the divine cannot jump out in front and lead them. So My description was an apt one in denoting the characteristics and the differences. No revelation, to be sure, but there were divine clues nonetheless about the fact this was not a divine undertaking, but coming from another source. And it was simply not possible for me to provide a breakthrough in understanding because of the time and cultural setting that I was working within. This is a revelation that greatly needs to come forward. And if it does not, there can be grave consequences. And we can only say this through you at the moment because you already know this to be so. You have earned your way to a broad understanding of the ongoing extraterrestrial agenda and its implications for humanity. That was not true in my day. People were not talking about such things. The existence of a hidden cabal of extraterrestrial beings and their human underlings was not appreciated nor conceived of. There has always been politics. There has always been oppression of people by rulers of many kinds. That is old news, but was never thought of as being otherworldly in origin. And that is the difference in what I knew and what you know here. And still, most people do not. But it must start somewhere. I kept the flame going about the possibility of divine communication with the living human, to reach out and tap information and divine wisdom as a resource to add richness and texture to human thinking, and in some ways to add clarification and a greater appreciation of the workings of the divine and the possibilities of human experience to move in new directions and with divine support along the way. This was a theme of my work, and we know is of you and your channel in your enterprise to enlighten humanity. This is our great hope for you and for the world as a whole, that people will pay attention. If they do not, there will be a huge price to pay in the end.
Okay, thank you. You described a giant solar crystal activated by the sun and used to harness energy and provide power on Atlantis. And then you gave a prediction that in 1958, the United States would rediscover a death ray that had been used on Atlantis. Was there such a crystal on Atlantis, and did this discovery of a death ray in fact happen?
There was such a crystal on Atlantis. The people of that era were very knowledgeable in manipulating energy of all kinds. And this has a modern counterpart. So we would answer both questions in the affirmative. There have been death rays discovered. They do not use a crystal from Atlantis, but other sources to assist in the technology to create devices to focus and send energy of varied kinds. Some in the public domain, others still sequestered with strict prohibitions about sharing of information. They constitute deep, dark secrets coveted by the military. But devices like the laser would fit both categories. Useful technological devices that also have the potential to be deadly if constructed in just the right way and with certain levels of energy as input. It can be used for communication and also to destroy things. So we were tuning into that family of physical devices and the corresponding energies they manipulate, and seeing in a prophetic fashion the advent of their implementation. The extraterrestrials among you have such devices. And the true meaning of the prophecy was less that humans would be creating these than that extraterrestrials would be here, and with a growing intention to use their advanced technological energy weapons to harm humans. Hence the death ray imagery. This, in fact, has been implemented against you time and time and time again. Less so on human populations than on nature, but on human populations in many instances, especially as a way to trigger war by creating a terrorist act, so-called, that is then blamed on a faction one can single out with growing resentment, fear, and hatred, and justifies military retribution all too readily, when in fact the true origin of the event was orchestrated through advanced extraterrestrial technological capability to mask its true origins and create circumstances that cry out for a human culprit to blame, and designed and orchestrated exactly in the right way to have a patsy in place, so to speak, who can be condemned and then targeted for retribution. So we would give ourselves an A+ in the general outline of this prophecy. But again, in the absence of understanding about extraterrestrial presence, I was not privy to greater intuitive information about in whose hands might that device be, and in what ways might it be utilized. This is always true in any kind of channeling exploration. There are constraints of all kinds on what can be allowed to come through. And it will be further reinterpreted by all who listen subsequently to a transcript of the exchange. And this is how rumors get going and expectations become carved in stone and then take on a life of their own at times. And many times, if one goes back with fuller knowledge and awareness, it can become clear in hindsight how there was a gap in understanding that allowed a misinterpretation to ensue. And so the channeler and the information were actually accurate, but only up to a certain point. And that was essentially the dead end of the moment, a gap in knowledge that could not be leaped over, at least at that juncture. So this is what took place, and the explanation we would give you. It is instructive in many ways because it is pointing still at the future, because you are not done with these beings. What seems like a rather old and moldy prophecy still has legs and still contains divine clues. These we have shared further with you in this exchange.
Okay, thank you. The abilities that have been attributed to you include astral projection, prophesizing, mediumship, viewing the Akashic records or book of life, and seeing auras. Your last essay was about auras, and seeing them was one skill you had that you could employ when awake. Can seeing auras be interfered with by dark spirits and alien psychics?